Now that we got a handle on our foundational exercises, you've heard about the theory of three-dimensionality. You've seen the concept of 3D applied to the foundational exercises, and then we went up and we moved. We learned by doing. We're now at the point where there's this pretty important principle. The variations, the 10 observational essentials, the crucial soul of R2 is hidden here. This is how we create variability. So you might be asking yourself, well, why do I care about variability? Can't I just continuously lunge anteriorly? Isn't that going to build my glutes? Isn't that going to strengthen my quads and my knee? Isn't that going to provide everything my body needs? And hopefully at this point, if you're asking yourself those questions, you've come up with the answer. The answer being, if we want to be true to authentic human function, and we've defined authentic human function as the needs, which we restored in R1, the wants, which we are now exploring here in R2, that are required to accomplish a goal, which is ultimately going to be R3, we get to a point where we say, man, if I really want to reach down here and I've restored motion, well, I have to have some way to reinforce that pattern so I strengthen the body. And this is where we really get excited about creating unlimited variability. This is where we get excited about using the system of Procedos. But in order to do that, we first have to learn the language. And the great news is the language is right on the platform. So memorization of this part is not necessary. It's more about understanding, anchoring, and being able to decode using your powers of observation to apply these different concepts. So, as we explore what R2 means to reinforce movement patterns, the Gray Institute has basically said that all functional movement is comprised of 10 observational essentials. And it's the manipulation and application of these observational essentials that gives Procedos its power. We understand that if my first foundational exercise is a hinge, we saw what the concept of 3D can do, and then we saw that applied on the Procedos, and hopefully your mind is going, whoa, the combinations are endless. But you also might have noticed that there were a few other changes that maybe didn't have a definition. These are the observational essentials. And going in order, we're going to describe and define exactly how to use these different variables and make sure that you're able to look at the platform, figure out exactly what you want to do because you've assessed your client, you figured out how to get them what they need, and now you want to give them what they want. You want to give them a great workout. You want to get them stronger. You want to get them more functionally resilient. You want to get them to jump higher, to kick stronger, or even just to not fall, to have a good, strong body. And we know that looking at the variations, the first thing is our action. Now, action is real simple. Action is the exercise. And we know this as professionals that we are. The first thing that we're going to do when we approach any client and we want to create an exercise is we have to think, well, what is the exercise I want to do? What is the movement I want to start with? And it might seem kind of redundant that we say, oh yeah, of course I think about it, but really think about it. Where do you want to begin? What's the difference between a squat and a lunge? Why would I start with a squat versus a lunge? Why would I start with a push over a pull? And really understanding and applying your scope of expertise to the action variable of the 10 observational essentials is a critical first step that is often overlooked. What Procedos basically says is, our system is laid out here. We think that if you're working through a general population, you follow the system in front of you. The memorization is, once again, non-existent. All we're trying to do is decode it. So the action that you would start off with is a hinge. So if we're starting off with the hinge, we're going to say, okay, great. I know I want to do a hinge. I know I want to lengthen and load that posterior capsule. I know I want to see if there's any bite in that anterior hip. I know I want to turn on the hamstrings and make sure the foot everts and make sure my spine stays in a relatively neutral brace position and every other concept that we want to apply to that. That's what I'm going after. That's my action. Great. Question is, where do I do it? Spoiler alert, you're in a Procedos course, so the environment is going to be Procedos, and that's our second observational essential. So environment's already figured out. What you have to think about is, well, where do I want to put Procedos? Do I want it to be in a room at a house? Do I want it to be on the gym floor? Is it hardwood? Is it concrete? Is it asphalt? Am I going to be on the grass, on the sand? These are the environmental questions you ask yourself, and they do affect everything. Even the noise affects what you're doing. Even the environment of the people around you affects what you're doing. So if you're in a clinic, if you're in a gym, if you're at home, all of these different things factor into our observational essential of environment. And the manipulation of that can be very critical. Moving on down, after we figure out the exercise we want to do, the environment that we want to do it, we say, okay, well, where am I starting this? And also, where am I stopping this? And the third observational essential is position. Now, we all a lot of times think, okay, feet shoulder width apart. Here's where I begin, and squat, and lunge, and jump. But then we go back and we say, okay, well, what is function? And how many times do I actually start a movement pattern in this position? Maybe standing up in a chair, but then I immediately walk, I locomote, I reach, I twist, I turn. So all of these different variable positions are encapsulated in our functional movement thought process. So because of that, it would behoove us to get in here and say, maybe I should change my beginning position. And once again, we apply the concept of 3D to say, is my beginning position here? And now I lunge here. Is my beginning position here? And now I lunge here. And we very quickly observe and we realize that these different beginning positions are pretty incredible, especially when it comes to authenticating what our clients are going through. But not only that, it just adds variability. It adds an element of novelty to the system. And we know, based on the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand, if we get our body to learn something, it can eventually own that something. So the more variability we create, the more different patterns that we're able to infuse into the system, the more resilient of a body we're going to build against injuries, but also the more fun our clients are going to have, especially if you're constantly changing up some little subtle details as we go through our observational essentials to keep them engaged. Beginning position is also polarized with end position. So if my lunging beginning position is here, and remember, we're going to do this on the platform in the application video next, but to kind of conceptualize it, if my beginning position is here, can't my end position be here? And then I reset. If I lunge here and I end here and reset, do we see the power that that has in terms of the body's ability to react? How the body and how the client have to be a little bit more focused, a little bit more engaged, just by manipulating our beginning position where I start and our end position where I end can create an enormous potential for creative capacity if we just follow the system. If we just use our power of observation to say, I want to start here, I want to end here, and I'm curious now what's happening at this hip. I'm curious now if I put a load here, if I put a load here, what that's doing. And these are the questions that the observations are going to open up for us. This is how we can use these variations to really enhance the variability that we have for our clients' foundational exercises. Moving on from position, we have driver. That's an easy one. We talked about that through the entire R1 section by basically saying motion is driven. Well, just as motion is driven, where we define motion as a specific area around a joint, so I have hip flexion, the movement then becomes a hinge. So the movement is a composite of different motions, and drivers also create movement, just as they create motions. So once again, thinking back to our local to global process, we now can say, all right, well, I can get my driver, my hands, to do a whole bunch of different really cool things. The system I follow is now the grid, the environment that I put my client on. Moving down, we say, all right, we have direction, height, and distance as our next three observational essentials. Now, these are my favorite, and they're super powerful because they compose what we would call the triangulation. Regardless of however you train, whether it's sagittally, whether it's with powerlifting, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's Pilates, yoga, any type of style, thought process, whether you're working out with just running, there's always a triangulation. Movements have to go somewhere. And we know that if there's a goal, it becomes functional. So we're beginning to connect the dots, and we're also using the overarching umbrella right now in the R2 of what the client wants. Do they want to sweat? Do they want to feel the burn? Do they want power? Do they want stability? Do they want safety? What do they want? We put that together by saying these three powerful observational essentials are what is going to dictate how this movement is completed. Now here's the beauty. If direction is first, when we use the Procedos, it's very easy to find the direction. Am I going forward? Am I going backwards? Am I going to the same side? Am I going to the opposite? Am I rotating? Am I rotating? And am I allowing this pattern to locomote, or am I staying stationary? And we'll see as we go through the application section of the 10 observational essentials how we can vary it up. But we realize our direction just gives us, hey, where is my horizontal displacement? And then we say, okay, well, what's the height variable? And this is where it gets really cool, because a lot of times we think in a box. We say, if I'm doing an anterior lunge, I go to about here where my legs are parallel, I have my knee over my toe, and I push back. That's my height, right here. But what we realize is that while that's a great application for strengthening, there's also a lot of variability that we're not thinking about. Do we ever think about end range? Do we ever think about initial range? Do we ever take a step and consider this a lunge where I need to have the control and stability in my initial range of motion? At the same time as I have to tie my shoe, I have to get into end range. I'm at an end range motion. Now, we'll obviously see compensations develop if there's dysfunction or imbalances in the system, but ultimately with a healthy client, with a healthy individual, we want to take the concept of 3D and we want to apply these variations to make sure that we hit all the different possibilities for this functional movement to be accurate. After we go after height, we go after distance. If I don't have a platform or if I don't have a target, as we said before, if I don't know where I'm going, I'm never going to hit it. So distance is taken into account by applying your beginning position to the platform, figuring out where your target is, and then manipulating that. Sometimes my distance can be right here. Sometimes my distance can be even further. And sometimes my distance can be all the way far end range. But here's the question. If I don't see where I'm going, how can I replicate it? Which is why the power of Procedos when it comes to direction, height, and distance is super critical, because now it's going to allow you to get in here and apply everything that we're talking about in theory. Moving down our observational essentials, we next have load. And here's the thing to remember about load. We always think dumbbells, we think weight, okay? But what if we had a resistance band? That's a load. What if we had a water bottle? That's a load. What if we had our body weight? That's a load. What if we had multiple different devices like a dumbbell and a band? That's another load. And as you'll see in our application section, all of these different combinations then get applied to our foundational exercises, and that's how we create the movement variability that is the R2 module. After that, we have our last two observational essentials, which are rate and duration. Now, the key difference here is rate is your speed. How fast or how slow are you going with your functional exercise? Whereas duration is for how long. So these are programming variables that we all have come to know. What I challenge you to consider, and what your curious scientist mind might be saying is, well, okay, how fast or how slow do I want to move? Well, let's look at the speed of function. Ask a soccer player how slow he's going to kick a ball when it's coming toward him. He might kind of laugh at you, because the speed at which he moves is the speed of sound. He is moving at his absolute maximal speed. So the question becomes, if we want to train this soccer player to be authentic to what he's doing on the field, are we instituting a functional exercise program that's going to allow us to hit that speed threshold? Are we moving things fast? Conversely, at the other end of the spectrum, are we moving things slow to maybe create a little bit more control, incorporate a little bit more balance, begin to give the nervous system different types of inputs? Because as we can go deep into the science of why one end versus the other is the most beneficial, we have to become cognizant and remember that all of these things are possible when it comes to real life, when it comes to function. And if we are in fact training functionally, we have to identify what the client needs, what they want, and what their goal is. And you'll find very quickly that all of these polarized possibilities fall within the scope of plausible, meaning we should at least consider, based on our scope of expertise, how to manipulate them. Finally, we get to duration, and we can apply anything to the Procedos, from Tabata training to high intensity interval training to 10 reps to even just following the dots and saying, okay, we're doing 9 lunges. That's our duration. And we understand very quickly that the programming becomes diverse, but but it also becomes simple because now we have the option to walk up to Procedos. We know that we're in the R2 programming module. We know that we want to reinforce functional movement patterns. We know that we want to get a lunge going better because we want this person to have better stability when they're walking. And we know that they're walking and their feet are going in all different planes. So we want to encapsulate all of that, and we want to do it with different speeds. We want to do it for different durations, and we know that longer durations elicit more of a burn. More of a burn is equated to a higher caliber workout in the minds of our clients. And while the science supports many different programming applications, my challenge to you, friends, is to consider the possibilities if you use the system in front of you to open up that creative expanse, to allow you to create that variability, knowing that via the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand, from a functional perspective, we can really authenticate, create novelty, create engagement, and really get our clients what they want.